The Force is old and full of shadows.
The air inside the invisible hand tastes like something that died and was then recycled. Ion exhaust, scorched plasteel, the particular chemical signature of a separatist warship running at emergency capacity 300 meters above Coruscant's cloud layer. Obi-Wan Kenobi has been breathing air like this for 3 years. He knows what it means when the deck vibrates at this specific frequency. The ventral drives are compensating for hull damage, which means the ship's navigational center is already managing 11 separate problems and hasn't gotten to them yet. He files this. He files everything. The blue blade of his lightsaber is a clean line through the smoke. Beside him, Anakin's blade moves differently, faster, more aggressive, the controlled chaos of someone who fights best when things are already on fire. They have done this for 3 years as well, moving together through the worst situations the war could manufacture, complementary instincts operating in a shared language that neither of them has ever had to speak aloud. Count Dooku waits at the end of the corridor. He is not a man you underestimate. Not twice. Not after you have faced him 4 times and catalogued every mistake you made in each exchange and rebuilt your approach from the ground up. Dooku fights with the patience of someone who has been fighting for 80 years and knows that patience is a weapon. His form is Makashi, the old form, the elegant form, designed for an era before blaster fire and crowd tactics turned combat into something messier than art. In his hands, it remains art, the curved hilt, the precision of each movement, the complete absence of wasted motion. Obi-Wan knows his rhythms now. He knows them the way you eventually come to know a difficult piece of music. Not just the notes, but the micro-timing, the tells that live between the movements, the slight shift in foot positioning that precedes the bind, the fractional opening of the left shoulder before the force-augmented thrust, the way Dooku's eyes focus approximately 1.4 seconds before he commits to a power technique. He has been waiting for this. 3 rounds of combat. The throne room is a wreckage of displaced furniture and scored stone. Anakin has pushed Dooku further than any of their previous encounters, harder, faster, the war having sharpened him into something that would have been frightening to meet at the beginning of all this. Dooku is not frightened, but he is adjusting in real time rather than reacting from a prepared position. This is new. Dooku doesn't like new. He turns to Obi-Wan. The Force gathers. Obi-Wan reads it through the soles of his boots before it manifests. A compression in the field, the specific pressure of telekinetic buildup targeting his mass and trajectory. He knows what this is. He has calculated what this would look like if it worked, a clean, efficient removal from the engagement. Crash him into the support column, buy 30 seconds of clear air with Anakin. In 3 previous encounters, Obi-Wan survived this move by fighting it, by bracing against it, converting resistance into counterattack, maintaining the engagement at the cost of everything he had. This time, he does something different. He lets it land. Not passively, the distinction matters enormously, and the distinction is everything. When the Force push comes, he is already moving with it, tucking, redirecting the kinetic energy rather than absorbing it, hitting the column with his shoulder instead of his back, and using the impact to continue the spin into a controlled fall rather than a collision. The sound of it is correct. The impact on his bones is real. He will feel this for a week. But where the column should have taken him out of the fight, it deposits him on the deck with his senses intact and his body playing the role of unconscious with the full commitment of a man who has spent 38 years learning to commit to things completely. He is still. His eyes are open. Barely. A sliver of light. From the floor he watches. Dooku falls. Not to Obi-Wan. To Anakin, who has done in 4 years of war what Obi-Wan spent a decade understanding would happen, becomes something beyond categorization, beyond the scope of what any form book prepared either of them for. The fight ends quickly once Obi-Wan goes down. Dooku disarmed. Anakin holding both blades. The Count on his knees, dignified even in defeat in the way that only men who have never truly been humbled manage. Dooku looks up at Anakin and says nothing. Anakin looks down and says nothing. The hesitation between them is real, and it is complicated, and it is, in the way of all genuinely important moments, about something much larger than the question in front of them. Then, from the chair at the room's far wall, the ornate chair where an old man sits bound and frightened, the chair that has been an irrelevant detail for the last 6 minutes of combat, a voice cuts through the smoke. Kill him. 2 words. Obi-Wan feels it before his ears process it, a ripple through the Force, cold, old, and deeply, profoundly wrong. Not the jagged fear, spike of someone watching violence from a position of helplessness. Not the emotional noise of a frightened man managing, in extremity, to locate his courage. This is something else entirely. This is command authority. The cold certainty of someone who has issued this kind of order 1,000 times and expects compliance the way gravity expects objects to fall. For 3 seconds, the Chancellor's Force signature burns through its neutral mask like a searchlight through fog. The mask is extraordinary. It is decades of deliberate construction, layered and precise and designed to be invisible. Obi-Wan has been in the presence of this man for years, without reading anything from him, neither warmth nor coldness, the Force impression of a non-sensitive, of someone whose inner life is simply not there to be read. What burns through now is not nothing. It is the opposite of nothing. It is ancient and vast and completely certain of itself, and it does not belong in the body of a frightened 74-year-old statesman in a capture chair. Then it's gone. The mask clamps back into place. The old man is frightened again, his Force presence retreating to that familiar blankness, and there is nothing in the room that reads as wrong to anyone who is actively searching for it. Obi-Wan is not actively searching. He is lying on the deck with his eyes almost closed, filing what he has just observed, making absolutely no external sign that he has observed anything at all. He is a recorder, not a censor. He stays still. Anakin hesitates for one breath that will cost him nothing today, and then he doesn't do it. He says something short and sharp to the Chancellor instead, something Obi-Wan can't fully catch over the ship's distress systems, and the moment passes. Dooku restrained rather than dead. The mission continues. Obi-Wan rises. He plays it correctly. Slightly dazed, one hand against the column, taking half a second longer than necessary to achieve vertical. He accepts Anakin's arm when it's offered. His shoulder registers the impact cost in very specific anatomical terms. Well, he says, that's that, I suppose. He doesn't feel dazed. He feels like a man who has visited a building 100 times and has just noticed, for the first time, that it has no foundation. The rest of it proceeds. The elevator shaft. Grievous, who is waiting for them in the way that things you can't quite kill tend to be waiting, and who departs when presented with sufficient reason to do so. The ship's dying trajectory through the upper atmosphere, Coruscant's cloud layer swallowing them whole. He makes 2 jokes during the controlled crash sequence. The jokes are genuine. This is not performance. Obi-Wan Kenobi jokes when things are genuinely terrible, because the alternative is letting the weight of genuinely terrible things sit on his chest until he can't breathe, and he has never been able to afford that particular luxury. But underneath each joke, a question is forming. Not, is Palpatine a Sith? He doesn't have enough for that. He has 1.3 seconds of Force bleed through, a command spoken in a tone that didn't match the role being performed, and a career's worth of training that tells him contradiction is the most reliable data point there is. He has spotted a move that doesn't fit the opponent's stated strategy. He doesn't yet know what strategy the move belongs to. The question is simpler, more fundamental. What kind of man orders an unarmed captive executed without hesitation, and then immediately returns to being frightened? The ship hits the surface. The landing pad is noise and light and the particular organized chaos of a public triumph. Republic officials, Senate observers, holocam crews. The full apparatus of wartime celebration, performing its function with practiced efficiency. Anakin moves toward Padam. Obi-Wan notes this with the peripheral awareness of a man who stopped pretending he didn't know what he knows a long time ago. He allows himself 30 seconds of visible relief. It is the correct amount. It would be suspicious to show nothing, and Obi-Wan Kenobi has not survived 38 years, 12 of them as a master operating in wartime, by failing to understand what visible relief is for. Across the pad, through the crowd and the noise and the movement, the Chancellor's eyes find his. Palpatine offers his warmest smile. The deeply paternal one, the one that says, "Well done, my boy." I knew you would manage it. I have always believed in you. It is an extraordinary smile. The smile of a man with nothing to hide, glad to see a trusted colleague emerge safely from danger. Obi-Wan smiles back. He feels this too, the ease of it. How completely natural the warmth appears. How very good this man is at being exactly what he claims. He will need to be better. The negotiation has begun. Pre-dawn Coruscant is a technical designation more than a sensory experience. The city generates its own luminescence and its own noise in volumes sufficient to make the absence of a natural sun a minor inconvenience rather than a condition. 30 floors below Padme Amidala's apartment, the traffic streams without interruption. Its hum rises through the building's infrastructure and settles into the walls at a frequency just below conscious notice, the sound of a civilization that has never found a reason to stop. Obi-Wan arrives at 0310 hours. 3 even beats, a pause, nothing further. The knock of a man who is not certain of his welcome and is not pretending otherwise. The pause before the door opens is 4 seconds. She is dressed. Working clothes, her hair arranged, no disrupted softness in her posture or her eyes. She has been awake for some time, which tells him something about the quality of her nights in recent weeks. She steps back from the door immediately, not a retreat. An invitation. He enters. The apartment is the particular quiet of a space that is consistently occupied and rarely rested in. Datapads on 3 surfaces, a half-finished glass of water on the low table, the condensation long since dried. The viewport beyond shows the city, enormous and entirely indifferent, conducting its business. He says it immediately. Before she can set the terms, I know you're married. I'm not here to discuss it. He holds her gaze briefly. I'm here because you have access I don't. Contacts I don't. And 13 years of watching Palpatine that I don't. And because what I've found cannot be handled by 2 people. Padme closes the door. She crosses to the kitchen, returns with 2 glasses of water, sets one in front of him, sits down across the table with the unhurried composure of someone who has been in difficult rooms for a very long time and has stopped performing calm, because calm has simply become her default register. Tell me everything, she says. She listens the way someone listens who has spent 13 years in the Senate and learned that the most dangerous thing you can do in a briefing is react before the speaker is finished. She doesn't interrupt. She doesn't move at individual pieces of what he describes, the Force signature burning through on the invisible hand. The financial threading through dummy corporations into emergency powers legislation, the relay with its timestamp predating the publicly announced attack. She is building a model in real time, and by the time he finishes she is very still in the way of someone who has reached a conclusion and is determining what to do with it. The blockade of Naboo, she says. He waits. There was a communications gap. 48 hours before Gunray's ships entered our orbit, certain diplomatic warning signals stopped transmitting. We filed a report with the Senate at the time. It was reviewed and dismissed as a technical malfunction in the relay network. A pause. I never accepted that. The gap was too clean, too precisely timed to be accidental. You kept the records. I keep everything. She stands and crosses to the secondary terminal, the one not registered to her Senate office, not visible on the building's standard network documentation. She works quickly, with the efficiency of someone who knows exactly where everything lives, because she put it there herself. I also keep things other people didn't think I was keeping, she says, without looking up. For example, the corporate registration filings for 3 of your dummy corporations. I encountered them 2 years ago during a subcommittee review of emergency powers legislation. The names meant nothing to me then. She turns the screen. The dummy corporations from his underworld research are there, same architecture, same concealed routing, but here they carry Senate registration numbers, incorporating dates. Shell company directors who, when he scrolls through the associated donor records, appear on the funding lists for specific pro-chancellor legislative packages. The fingerprints are now 1 layer closer to the source than anything he found on level 1313. He looks at her. 2 years, he says. I had pieces, she says. You have pieces. Neither of us had enough to act on. Together we have a case. We have the beginning of a case, she says, which is more accurate and considerably less comfortable. We have a case when we have something that presents itself to the Senate without requiring anyone to simply take our word for it. She makes the first call at 0340. Mon Mothma answers within 2 rings, which confirms what her expression already suggests. She has not been sleeping well, and not just tonight. She is 27 years old and carrying the specific exhaustion of someone who has been watching something go wrong for long enough that the watching has become a weight of its own. She listens without interrupting. When Obi-Wan finishes, she is quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Voting patterns, she says. 18 months. Bills that were dead on the floor and then passed within 48 hours of a major separatist engagement. I've been cataloging them. I didn't know what I was cataloging. Another pause. I do now. She has the files organized and ready to transmit before the call ends. She has been organized and ready for longer than this conversation required. She asks one question before signing off. How long before he knows we're building this? Less time than we need, Obi-Wan says. More than we would have had if we'd waited. Mon Mothma nods once, in the way of someone accepting an answer they already expected, and ends the transmission. The second call is Bail Organa. He answers at 0400, dressed. Seated at his desk with the expression of a man who has been expecting exactly this kind of call, and has been expecting it for some time. Behind him, Alderaan's night shows through the viewport, genuine darkness, actual stars, a sky that has not been drowned in artificial light. Obi-Wan finds this briefly affecting in a way he notes and moves past. The Naboo blockade communications gap, Obi-Wan says. Bail's expression doesn't shift. I have them. You kept them. I file things that don't make sense until they do. He is already at his own terminal, under a maintenance budget review from the Chancellor sector. Obscure enough that no one would go looking. Specific enough that I can find it in 30 seconds. He locates the file and turns the screen. Here the records come through. They match Padm's documentation precisely. The same gap, the same clean silence in the diplomatic channels, the same impossibly convenient timing. 2 people at opposite ends of the political establishment kept the same evidence in separate places for a decade, waiting for a context that made it useful. It is useful now. Bail looks at both of them on the split screen. Who else knows? 2 others, Obi-Wan says. Not yet reached through this channel. When you brief them, I want to be in the room, Bail says. Not a request, an offered resource. The difference matters. Alderaan's delegation has been monitoring emergency powers overreach for 2 years. If this reaches a floor vote, I need to be part of the mechanism, not informed of it afterward. Agreed, Padm says. Bail Organa nods once and closes the channel. The apartment is quieter afterward. The calls have accomplished their purpose. The evidence package is now larger, more distributed, harder to suppress from any single point of leverage. But Padm is looking at him with the expression she reserves for saying things that are both true and inconvenient, and he waits for it. If we expose him and fail, she says, they won't simply move against him. They'll construct a story around the attempt. The Jedi who turned against a legitimate chancellor, who tried to remove an elected official because they wanted power. Because they feared losing it. She doesn't look away. They'll need a face for that story. Someone to stand as the reason the Jedi couldn't be trusted. He knows where this ends. Anakin will be the narrative, she says. He doesn't wave it away. He doesn't reassure her with the reflexive confidence of someone who hasn't actually considered the problem. He sits with it for long enough that she understands he is weighing it rather than waiting for his turn to speak. You're right, he says, which is why the evidence package has to be self-presenting. When it reaches the Senate floor, it needs to tell its own story clearly enough that no alternative version can be written over it. The narrative problem is real. The answer to it isn't speed, it's architecture. We build something that doesn't require a trusted messenger because the evidence is its own messenger. Padm holds his gaze. That's a standard. It's not a plan. Here's the plan, he says. He tells her. She listens. She asks 4 questions in sequence, each of which identifies a structural weakness in one element of what he has described. And each correction improves it. This is what 13 years of direct observation buys. She knows where the institution is hollow, where it will hold, where pressure applied in the wrong place will collapse the wrong wall. By the end of the conversation, the plan is no longer his plan adjusted by her questions. It is something they have built together in the space of 40 minutes. And it is better than either of them would have arrived at alone. He stands to leave. Before I go, he says, I want to formalize the protection arrangement, given what we're setting in motion. Your apartment, your office, your staff. Anakin and Rex will manage the operational parameters. Nothing visible, no change to your public schedule, no signal of alarm. She nods. She is already running the logistics. He adjusts before she can finalize the parameters. The arrangement should account for 2 additional individuals. Same protocols, same discretion, same priority level. He does not say, I know you're pregnant. He says it in the arithmetic instead, in the number 2, where there might have been 0. And she reads the equation precisely the way she reads everything, completely, immediately, and without requiring it to be stated aloud. Something crosses her face. Not quite relief, not quite grief. The specific expression of someone who has been carrying something alone and has just been seen without being exposed. Thank you, she says quietly. He nods, moves to the door, stops with his hand on the frame. Get some sleep, he says. What we're building requires you thinking faster than everyone in the room, and that requires rest. It always requires me thinking faster than everyone in the room, Padam says. I've managed. You have, he says, and means it completely, and leaves. Anakin runs the drill sequence for the 14th time. Not because he needs to. His body has known Form V since he was 16. The sequences are grooved into his muscle memory so deeply that running them requires approximately the same conscious investment as breathing. He runs them because at 0200 hours, with the nightmares sitting at the edge of his awareness like something that has been asked to wait and is losing patience. The only reliable option is to exhaust the body until the mind has no choice but to stop. His quarters are dark, except for the blue light of his ignited blade. Civilian clothes, dark, loose, nothing that announces what he is during the 900 hours of the week he isn't actively being it. Without the armor and the robes and the rank insignia, he looks his age. 22. He is aware intellectually that this is very young. He has not felt young since he was approximately 15. He is mid-rotation on the 14th sequence when the knock comes. He knows the rhythm before he registers knowing it. 3 beats, slight pause. 1, Obi-Wan's knock, which has not changed since Obi-Wan used it to signal this is me. Not an emergency when Anakin was 9 years old and went through a period of catastrophizing every sound in the temple at night. He hasn't knocked any other way in 13 years. The familiarity of it is irritating in the specific way that only familiar things can be. Anakin deactivates his blade, starts to say something sharp about the hour. Then, Obi-Wan steps through the door, and Anakin stops. He is not in formal robes. This is the first wrong thing. Obi-Wan in informal clothes at night is not unusual, but Obi-Wan moving in informal clothes with that particular quality of controlled economy means something different than Obi-Wan at rest. The second wrong thing is his face, not distressed, not alarmed, but running on something other than rest in a way that 3 days of operational concealment haven't fully hidden. He looks like a man who has been carrying something alone for exactly as long as he could manage. He doesn't offer an explanation. He sits down. Not across from Anakin. Beside him. On the floor, back against the wall, in the manner of someone who has decided this conversation will not be conducted from opposite sides of anything. Anakin waits. This, at least, he has gotten better at. I faked being knocked out, Obi-Wan says. On the invisible hand. When Dooku threw me into the column, I wasn't unconscious. A beat. Something in Anakin's chest does something complicated. A sound that is almost a laugh escapes him. Because of course. Of course he did. This is the most Obi-Wan thing that has ever happened, and Anakin has witnessed 13 years of Obi-Wan things, which is a significant sample size. How long? He asks. 4 seconds. Long enough for what? Long enough, Obi-Wan says, to see something I needed to see. He doesn't pause for effect. He moves directly into what he found, not as a revelation, not as a performance of weight, but as a map, laid out piece by piece in the same clean declarative style he uses for battle plans, because that is what this is, a battlefield they are only now seeing the actual shape of. The kill him. 2 words from the chair that carried the wrong frequency. The Force signature burning through for 1. 3 seconds, old and cold and vast, and carrying the specific certainty of command rather than the emotional noise of fear. The financial threads in the underworld. 4 layers of dummy corporations, separatist funding moving through into Republic legislation, fingerprints 3 generations removed but the architecture unmistakable. Dooku's contact, who didn't know who he worked for but knew the meeting locations. The relay on sublevel 1313, military-grade encryption, last active 3 hours before Grievous's attack, was publicly acknowledged. He doesn't editorialize, he describes. He trusts Anakin to build the conclusion himself, because Anakin has always been faster at synthesis than anyone gives him credit for. And because presenting the conclusion rather than the evidence would be the wrong kind of respect. Anakin goes still. Not the stillness of shock, not the stillness of denial, the specific stillness of recognition. He has been here before, in a different form, with different content, but the architecture of this moment is familiar in a way that is deeply unpleasant. The feeling of a thing you have been not looking at for a long time finally standing in the room where you cannot choose where your eyes go. The nightmares have been adjacent to Palpatine for months, not about him, not exactly. But the nightmares carry a texture, a quality of dread that lives in a specific register, and that register has been present in every conversation in the Chancellor's office for longer than he's let himself notice. The Chancellor's promises always felt perfect, not good, perfect, the exact shape of what Anakin needed to hear, every time, without exception. He had thought, when he noticed this, that it was simply what it felt like to be genuinely understood by someone. To have someone who saw you completely, and approved of what they saw, who told you that you were special not because there was a use for your power, but because you were worth caring about for yourself. He had been 9 years old when he arrived on Coruscant. A slave boy from the Outer Rim dropped into a culture he didn't understand, full of power everyone was afraid of. The Chancellor had been the first person who seemed to care about him rather than about what he could do. You don't interrogate the motives of the person who tells a frightened child that he belongs. You need it too much. Recognizing the mechanism doesn't make the original need disappear. This is the part that hits hardest, not the betrayal itself, but the understanding that the need was real, that it was legitimate, and that it was specifically selected because of how real and how legitimate it was. Someone studied the exact shape of the wound and built a tool precisely fitted to it. He doesn't explode. He doesn't deny it. The stillness holds. Then, very quietly, "How long have you known?" "I've had 1.3 seconds and 48 hours, Obi-Wan says. "You've had longer than that. You simply weren't allowed to know that you knew." Anakin sets down his lightsaber. "It is a small gesture. It is not a small gesture." "He told me things," he says. His voice is level. He is working to keep it level, and they both know this. And neither of them names it. About the Council. About the war. About what I was capable of. Things that felt true. Some of them probably were, Obi-Wan says. The best manipulation always contains accurate material. The factual content isn't the instrument. The instrument is the relationship. The sense of being known. A silence. The temple breathes around them. "I am not the problem," Anakin says. Not a question, testing the shape of the words, the way you press a bruise to locate its exact borders. "You are not the problem, Anakin." Obi-Wan's voice carries no softness, no careful management of impact. This is simply the truth stated at the correct volume for truth. You were never the problem. You are the target. What follows is not a breakdown in the conventional sense. There is no raised voice. Nothing breaks. Anakin is 22 years old, and has spent those years under conditions that burned away any version of him that processes grief loudly. What happens is quieter and considerably harder to watch. He puts his face in his hands. He sits there. The blue light is gone, the room lit now only by the city through the viewport. Coruscant's perpetual glow, the light of a civilization conducting its business without any awareness of what is happening in this room. Obi-Wan doesn't move, doesn't reach for any of the things that people reach for when they are uncomfortable with grief in the same room as silence. He waits. When he speaks, he doesn't look at Anakin directly. When Qui-Gon died, he says, I was 25 years old, and I was angry at the Council for a year afterward. Not publicly. Inside, where I kept things I didn't know what to do with. A pause. The words are chosen with precision rather than care, accuracy rather than comfort. I was angry at the Force itself. I spent months convincing myself the flaw was in me, that I hadn't been present enough, hadn't listened hard enough, hadn't been worth the breath he used to give me his final instruction. I carried that longer than I should have, and I carried it alone, which made it heavier than it needed to be. He doesn't move. His voice stays level. The flaw was not in me. The flaw was in the situation. Not everything that breaks you is your fault, Anakin. Some things are simply terrible, and they happen to you, and they leave marks, and you continue and carry the marks forward. That's all. The marks are not evidence of deficiency. They are evidence that something terrible occurred. The silence holds for a moment longer. You are not broken, he says. You are precisely who you are supposed to be. That is exactly why he wanted you, and exactly why he needed you not to know it. Anakin doesn't speak for a while. When he does, his voice has changed register, not soft, but something in it has stopped performing. What do? We, not you, not I. The shift is immediate and total, the decision made in the speaking of it, not before. Obi-Wan registers this. He does not make anything of it. He files it as the most important thing that has happened in this room, and moves forward. First, he says, you tell me everything he said to you in the last 6 months that felt like something you specifically needed to hear. Anakin looks at him. The exhaustion on his face is visible now in a way it wasn't when Obi-Wan came in. The specific exhaustion of a man who has been holding weight in the wrong position for years, and has finally been allowed to shift his grip long enough to feel what it actually costs. That's going to take a while. I have time, Obi-Wan says. Simply, without ceremony. He doesn't feel lighter. He feels like a man who has just picked up a sword he was afraid to touch. It is heavier than he expected. It is also, in the way of things that are simply correct for your hand, perfectly balanced. Outside the viewport, Coruscant's night continues without them. The city does not sleep. The city does not know what has shifted in this room, what foundational thing a 22-year-old has finally, after 13 years, set down. The control he has been white-knuckling since he was 9 years old on a shuttle from Tatooine, not yet certain whether anything in this galaxy was prepared to hold his weight. There always was. He simply needed someone to sit down beside him on the floor and say so, without asking for anything in return. Pre-dawn Coruscant is a technical designation more than a sensory experience. The city generates its own luminescence and its own noise, in volume sufficient to make the absence of a natural sun a minor inconvenience rather than a condition. 30 floors below Padme Amidala's apartment, the traffic streams without interruption. Its hum rises through the building's infrastructure and settles into the walls at a frequency just below conscious notice. The sound of a civilization that has never found a reason to stop. Obi-Wan arrives at 0310 hours. 3 even beats. A pause, nothing further. The knock of a man who is not certain of his welcome and is not pretending otherwise. The pause before the door opens is 4 seconds. She is dressed. Working clothes, her hair arranged, no disrupted softness in her posture or her eyes. She has been awake for some time, which tells him something about the quality of her nights in recent weeks. She steps back from the door immediately, not a retreat. An invitation. He enters. The apartment is the particular quiet of a space that is consistently occupied and rarely rested in. Datapads on 3 surfaces. A half-finished glass of water on the low table. The condensation long since dried. The viewport beyond shows the city, enormous and entirely indifferent, conducting its business. He says it immediately, before she can set the terms. I know you're married. I'm not here to discuss it. He meets her eyes briefly. I'm here because you have access I don't, contacts I don't, and 13 years of watching Palpatine that I don't. And because what I've found cannot be handled by 2 people. Padme closes the door. She goes to the kitchen area, returns with 2 glasses of water, sets one in front of him, sits down across the table. "Tell me everything," she says. She listens the way someone listens who has been trained to remember information under pressure and has spent 13 years doing exactly that. She doesn't interrupt. She doesn't react visibly to individual pieces of what he describes. The force signature on the invisible hand, the financial threading, the relay with its damning timestamp. She is assembling as she listens, building a model in real time, and by the time he finishes she is very still in the way of someone who has reached a conclusion and is deciding what to do with it. "The blockade of Naboo," she says. He waits. There was a gap in the diplomatic channels. 48 hours before Gunray's ships entered our orbit, certain warning signals stopped transmitting. We filed a report with the Senate at the time. It was reviewed and dismissed as a technical malfunction in the relay network. She pauses. I never accepted that. The gap was too clean, too precisely timed. You kept the records. I keep everything. She stands, crosses to the apartment's secondary terminal, the one that is not registered to her Senate office and does not appear in the building's standard network documentation. She works quickly, with the efficiency of someone who knows exactly where everything is, because she put it there herself. I also keep things other people didn't think I was keeping, she says, without looking up. For example, the corporate registration filings for 3 of your dummy corporations. I encountered them 2 years ago during a subcommittee review of emergency powers legislation. The names meant nothing to me then. They will now. She turns the screen so he can see it. The dummy corporations from his underworld research are there, the same architecture, the same concealed routing. But here, they have Senate registration numbers, incorporating dates, the names of shell company directors who, when he scrolls through the associated records, appear on donor lists for specific pro-chancellor legislative packages. The fingerprints are now 1 layer closer to the source than anything he found in level 1313. He looks at her. You've had this for 2 years, he says. I had pieces, she says. You have pieces. Neither of us had enough to do anything with. Together we have a case. We have the beginning of a case, she says, which is more accurate and considerably less comfortable. We have a case when we have something that can present itself to the Senate without requiring anyone to take our word for it. She makes the first call at 0340. Mon Mothma answers within 2 rings, which confirms what the dark circles under her eyes on the screen suggest. She has not been sleeping well either, and she has not been sleeping well for longer than tonight. She is 27 years old, and looks, in this moment, like someone carrying the weight of a decision she hasn't yet found the right moment to make. She listens to Obi-Wan's summary the same way Padam did, without interrupting, building the model. Voting patterns, she says, when he finishes. 18 months, bills that were dead on the floor, and then passed within 48 hours of a major separatist engagement. I've been tracking it. I didn't know what I was tracking. A pause. I do now. She has the files organized and ready to transmit before the call ends. She has been organized and ready for longer than this conversation. She asks one question before she goes. How long do we have before he knows we're building this? Less time than we need, Obi-Wan says. More than we would have had if we'd waited. Mon Mothma nods once, in the specific way of someone accepting an answer they already expected, and ends the call. The second call is Bail Organa. He answers at 0400, dressed, sitting at his own desk with the expression of a man who was already thinking about exactly this kind of call, and has been thinking about it for some time. Alderaan's night cycle shows through his viewport, actual darkness, actual stars, the particular quality of a sky not drowned in artificial light. Obi-Wan finds this briefly affecting in a way he files and sets aside. The Naboo blockade communications gap, Obi-Wan says. Bail's expression doesn't change. I have them. You kept them. I keep things that don't make sense until they do. He is already moving toward his own terminal. I've had them filed under a maintenance budget review from the Chamal sector. Obscure enough that no one would go looking. Specific enough that I could find it in 30 seconds. He locates the file. Here, the records come through. They match Padam's documentation precisely. The same gap, the same clean silence in the diplomatic channels, the same impossibly convenient timing. Two people, on opposite ends of the political establishment, kept the same evidence in different places for a decade, waiting for a context in which it was useful. It is useful now. Bail looks at both of them on the split screen. Who else knows? Two others, Obi-Wan says. Not yet briefed through this channel. When you brief them, I want to be present, Bail says. Not a request, an offered resource. The difference matters. Alderaan's Senate delegation has been watching emergency powers legislation for 2 years. If this goes to a floor vote, I need to be part of the mechanism, not informed of it afterward. Agreed, Padam says. Bail Organa nods once and ends the call. The apartment is quieter afterward. The calls have accomplished what they were meant to accomplish. The evidence package is now larger, more distributed, harder to suppress. But Padam is looking at him with the expression she reserves for saying things that are true and unwelcome, and he waits for it. If we expose him and fail, she says, they won't simply move against him. They'll build a narrative around the attempt. The Jedi who turned on a legitimate chancellor, who tried to remove an elected official because they wanted power, because they feared losing it. She pauses. They'll need a face to put on that story. Someone to be the reason the Jedi couldn't be trusted. He knows where this is going. Anakin will be the narrative, she says. He doesn't wave this away. He doesn't reassure. He sits with it for long enough that she knows he is actually considering it and not waiting for her to finish so he can speak. You're right, he says, which is why the evidence package has to be self-presenting. When it goes to the Senate, it has to tell its own story with enough clarity that no one can write a different one over it. The narrative problem is real, and the answer to it is not speed, it's architecture. Padam looks at him steadily. That's not a plan. That's a standard. Here's the plan, he says. He tells her. She listens. She asks 4 questions, each of which requires him to revise one element of what he has just described, and each revision improves it. By the end of it, they have something that is more than the beginning of a case. He stands to leave. Before he does, I want to formalize the protection arrangement, he says, given what we're setting in motion. You, your office staff, your apartment. Anakin and Rex will coordinate the operational side. It won't be visible, nothing that signals alarm or changes your public schedule. She nods. She is already running the parameters. He adjusts them before she can ask. The arrangement should include 2 additional individuals, covered under the same protocols, same discretion. He does not say, I know you're pregnant. He says it in the arithmetic instead, in the number 2 where there might have been 0, and she reads the equation the way she reads everything, completely, immediately, and without requiring it to be said aloud. A beat. Something moves across her face that is not quite relief and not quite grief. Something that has been waiting a long time for the specific shape of being seen without being exposed. Thank you, she says. He nods once, moves to the door, stops with his hand on the frame. Get some sleep, he says. What we're building is going to require you thinking faster than everyone in the room, and that requires rest. It always requires me thinking faster than everyone in the room, Padam says. I've managed. You have, he agrees, and means it fully, and leaves. The room Obi-Wan chose is 3 levels below the temple's main floor, a secured briefing chamber used for intelligence operations, sensitive enough to warrant shielding against both electronic surveillance and incidental force projection outward. Stone walls, minimal furnishings, the quality of air in a space that has been sealed more often than opened. The force dampening built into the architecture is passive. It doesn't suppress power. It contains it. Whatever happens inside these walls doesn't broadcast through the building's shared environment. He chose it for precisely that reason. What they are about to attempt would register to every force sensitive in the temple if they tried it anywhere else. Anakin sits across from him on the floor. No formal posture, legs crossed, forearms on his knees, watching Obi-Wan with the focused patience the war has added to his existing nature. He has been briefed on the theory. He has questions. You've done this before, he says. Force battle meld? Yes, in combat. Coordinating with other Jedi during engagement. Brief, shallow, purpose-specific. Obi-Wan settles into position. What I'm proposing is different. Deeper, sustained. How deep? Deep enough that there can't be anything between us. No compartmentalization. No withheld content. He meets Anakin's eyes directly. For this to function, for the combined sensitivity to produce clarity rather than interference, both of us have to be fully transparent. No hidden rooms. A silence. You've known about Padm for months, Anakin says. Not an accusation, a recalibration. The Force bond between you isn't subtle to someone trained to read such things. I chose not to raise it because it wasn't mine to raise. A pause. I'm raising it now because the meld won't function if you're spending energy keeping it from me. And because it doesn't need to be kept from me. Anakin looks at the wall for a moment. Something is working behind his eyes, not resistance, but adjustment. The specific expression of someone revising the map of what they thought they were carrying alone. What do you have to lay down? He asks. Obi-Wan takes the question with the seriousness it deserves. My certainty that I trained you correctly, he says. I've been carrying that as settled fact for 13 years. I don't know that it's true. I know I tried. I know the war replaced what I had planned with something neither of us chose. A beat. And the grief. Qui-Gons. I have managed it rather than resolved it, and managed grief is still weight. Anakin is looking at him in the way he looks at things he is seeing clearly for the first time. All right, he says. They go still. The technique requires mutual lowering, not passive, not the dropping of defenses, but the active choice to make oneself fully permeable. Obi-Wan has done this with other Jedi under combat conditions, where the urgency of the situation makes the transparency feel irrelevant. In stillness, with full awareness of what you are opening, it costs considerably more. He feels the moment Anakin opens. It is not what he expected. He has spent 13 years experiencing Anakin's Force presence as a kind of weather, large, dynamic, capable of intensities that required active management. What he feels now, with the barriers down, is the same scale but different in quality. The rawness of it, grief sitting just below the surface, his mother, present and unresolved. The nightmares he has never named to anyone. The fear, carefully maintained, that the Council's doubt about him is not prejudice, but accurate reading. That the darkness he feels in himself is not a challenge to be met, but a prophecy in progress. He lets Anakin feel what he is carrying in return. The uncertainty. The grief he has labeled completion and hasn't. 13 years of presenting confidence he genuinely possesses most of the time and performs the rest. The meld takes. The Force opens. Not visually. This is not something the eyes participate in. There is no landscape, no light and dark rendered in terms that the visual cortex can process. It is sensory in a way that language approximates poorly and must try anyway. It is like suddenly having more surface area, every nerve ending extending outward into something vast, registering information at a scale the ordinary senses cannot reach. Obi-Wan feels Anakin's power functioning beneath him like bedrock, enormous, ancient in a way that has nothing to do with age, the specific quality of something that exists at the intersection of the Force rather than merely within it. A vergence. The prophecy made experiential and undeniable. He focuses the combined sensitivity the way a lens focuses light, not searching. Receiving, letting the Force move through the aperture they have created together, and registering what it returns. The shroud is immediately apparent, not as a presence, as an architecture. The Force flows through Coruscant in patterns, through billions of lives, through the layered complexity of the city's history and sustained habitation. He knows these patterns. He has felt this city his entire adult life. What he feels now, with Anakin's reach amplifying his own, is the shape of something that does not belong in those patterns. A region where the Force moves differently. Not blocked, redirected, the way a river redirects around something it cannot move through. He doesn't try to see through it. He maps its edges. The age of it comes first, and it is the most disturbing thing. Decades, not years. Not a construction of recent necessity, this has been built across the span of a long career. 30 years at minimum. Something installed before the Clone Wars, before the Separatist crisis, before emergency powers were ever proposed in the Senate chamber. Something that was already old when the Republic's current troubles began. The shape comes next. Deliberate, that is the word the Force returns for it, not organic, not the natural accumulation of darkness that follows tragedy and suffering and war, but constructed. Maintained, renewed, the architecture of active concealment rather than the residue of genuine emotion. Something that requires ongoing effort to sustain, that has been sustained continuously for 30 years without a single gap. And at its center, its gravitational point, the location from which the distortion radiates outward across the entire planet like cold radiating from a buried stone, is the Senate building, not the Separatist underground, not a hidden installation in the lower city, not anywhere Obi-Wan's 48 hours of underworld investigation pointed to. The Senate building, the administrative center of the Republic's governance, the place where the Chancellor keeps his office, his private antechamber, his view of the skyline he has been engineering for 30 years. He doesn't name the conclusion. The Force has already named it. Then, Anakin's reach extends further. Divergence doesn't constrain itself to what they came looking for. It casts outward in all directions simultaneously, feeling the city the way a living thing feels weather, and Obi-Wan feels it reach the clone garrison at the Coruscant barracks, thousands of Force presences, the particular muted quality of non-sensitives in large number. The specific texture of people who are deeply trained and have spent years in proximity to Jedi. Rex, Cody, every brother in the garrison, their presences familiar and distinct, and inside each one, something wrong. He focuses on it. A rhythm. Mechanical, perfectly regular, operating at a frequency that has nothing to do with the biological processes of the people it inhabits. Not a Force signature, something adjacent to Force awareness, but not part of it. External to the being carrying it. Closer to a clock than a heartbeat. Installed rather than grown. Thousands of instances, every clone presence in the garrison carrying the same wrong rhythm, the same external pulse operating beneath consciousness, beneath choice. Beneath everything that makes a person the person they are. All of them identical, all of them waiting. He understands what he is feeling. He does not want to understand it. He lets the meld collapse. The return to ordinary sensation is abrupt. The room reasserts itself, stone walls and sealed air, and the specific weight of two people breathing in a closed space. Anakin opens his eyes at precisely the same moment Obi-Wan does. Neither speaks immediately. The Force still resonates between them. The echo takes time to quiet after a meld this deep. They are more legible to each other now than they have ever been, and both of them are managing the particular discomfort of having been fully seen and finding it less catastrophic than feared. It is Anakin who breaks the quiet. "The chips," he says. 2 words. "Yes, every one of them. Everyone in the garrison. We can't confirm beyond Coruscant from here, but every one of them," Anakin says again. Not a question. A conclusion being absorbed, landing its full weight. Something moves behind his eyes. Obi-Wan recognizes it from the meld. The grief that lives just below the surface, finding a new object. 3 years of war. 3 years of Rex and Cody and Fives, and everyone who didn't survive to this conversation, every one of them carrying something inside their skulls that they never knew was there and could not have refused. The silence holds. "How old is the shroud?" Anakin asks finally. 30 years. Perhaps longer. Anakin takes this in. His jaw tightens once, then releases. "Before the war," he says, "long before." Another silence. This one is different in quality, not grief, but the sound of a decision that has already been made and is waiting only to be stated. "Tell me what we do first," he says. Obi-Wan looks at him. The person sitting across the room is the same person who came through a temple door 13 years ago, and is also not that person, and they have both just stopped pretending otherwise, and there is something quietly permanent about that. "The clones," he says, "before anything else. Before we move on Palpatine, before we brief the Council, before we do anything else at all, we get those chips out." Anakin nods once. "Rex," he says. "Rex, Rex is writing casualty reports when Anakin arrives. Not because it's his job. The administrative work belongs technically to the battalion's documentation officer. Rex does it himself, because the clones who don't come back deserve to have someone who knew them put their name on the page. He has been doing this since the first engagement of the war. 3 years later, the habit has become obligation, which has become something he doesn't examine too closely, because examining it makes it hard to continue. He looks up when the door opens. His hand is halfway to his blaster before he registers who it is. Anakin is not in armor. Civilian clothes, hood up, something deliberate in the way he's moving. This is not a general visiting his troops. This is a man who has come to say something that doesn't fit in any official channel. Rex sets down the datapad. "Close the door," Anakin says. Rex closes it. He listens the way he listens to field intelligence, fully, without interruption, building the picture as the pieces arrive. Anakin lays it out in sequence, the Force evidence from the meld. The shape and age of the concealment centered on the Senate building, the financial threads traced through the underworld, the relay with its timestamp. Precise and unflinching about all of it. Rex doesn't need convincing. This is the first thing he understands about his own response as the briefing continues. He is not fighting the information, not running it against internal resistance. He is confirming a picture he has been carrying in outline form for months without being able to fill in. Anakin gets to the chips. He explains what the meld revealed, the wrong rhythm inside every clone in the garrison, mechanical and regular and installed. What it is. What it's designed to do. The signal that would trigger it. The order the signal would carry. Rex is quiet for a long moment. "Fives," he says. It is not a question, and Anakin knows it isn't a question. "Yes," he says. Another silence. Rex looks at the middle distance, not dissociating, processing. The specific expression of a man who has been carrying a doubt for 7 months and has just learned the doubt was correct, which is not vindication and is not relief. It is heavier than both of those things. "He tried to tell us," Rex says. The breakdown. The official report. "I knew it wasn't right. I've known since the day it happened." The sentence stops. Restarts. Fives didn't break. He wasn't. It wasn't a breakdown. He found something and they killed him for it. And they made it look like the thing he found had driven him to break down so no one would look at what he actually found. He says all of this in the same flat, controlled register he uses for everything. This is not a performance of calm. It is the specific expression of a man holding a large amount of grief with both hands who will not be setting it down right now because there is work to do and the work is more important than the grief. "He was right," Anakin says quietly. "I know he was right," Rex says. "He was always right. He just couldn't prove it, and the people who needed to believe him didn't. And he died." A pause. "We didn't believe him. We were manipulated into not believing him." There's a difference. Rex looks at him. "Is there?" Anakin holds his gaze. "Yes, and I think Fives would have said so." A long silence. Rex picks up the casualty report he was working on. Sets it down again. Looks at his hands, at the work he was doing before all of this arrived, the names he was putting on pages, the specific weight of that. "What do you need from me?" he says. What Anakin needs is everything Rex is authorized to give, and several things he isn't, which Rex has already understood and already decided are available regardless. The 501st Coruscant Garrison, 500 troopers under Rex's direct command. The Coruscant Hope, the 501st's attached medical frigate currently in standard orbit, carrying a full surgical suite and 3 medical droids running at capacity. A cover story. Routine neurological screening following the invisible hand engagement. Standard procedure for head trauma risk assessment after the Battle of Coruscant. 12 minutes per procedure, Anakin says. 6 droids working continuously, 50 hours to clear the garrison, Rex says. He has already done the math. He has, Anakin realizes, done it faster than Anakin did, which is not surprising. Rex does math the way other people breathe. 50 hours. Yes, and the 212th? Obi-Wan is with Cody now. Rex nods. He sets down the datapad permanently. The casualty reports can wait until after the galaxy stops being on the verge of ending. He moves to his operations terminal and begins working without further preamble. The cover story holds if we run it through the standard post-battle screening protocol, he says, pulling up the medical coordination interface. Every trooper who had any contact with Grievous's forces during the Invisible Hand engagement qualifies for flagging. That covers the entire garrison without requiring a separate authorization. He is already routing requests as he speaks. I'll need the authorization codes from the battalion's chief medical officer. I can get those within the hour without raising questions if I run it through the standard equipment request channel. This is what Rex does when he commits. There is no ceremony to it, no declaration. He simply begins solving the logistical problems in the order they present themselves and continues until the work is done. Rex, Anakin says. He looks up. What they did to Fives, to all of them, it ends here. That's what this is. Rex holds his gaze for a moment. Something in his face acknowledges the weight of that without performing it. I know what it is, he says. That's why I'm already running the numbers. He turns back to the terminal. First batch scheduled for the Coruscant Hope within 2 hours. I'd recommend starting with the troopers on rotation this week. The scheduling is already disrupted from the battle, so the additional medical time won't flag against standard patterns. Do it. Across the temple complex, Obi-Wan sits across from Commander Cody in the same secured chamber used the night before. Cody listens the way Cody listens to everything, with the complete attention of someone who will not be asking for a repeat of any part of the briefing, because he will not have failed to retain any of it. When Obi-Wan finishes, the silence runs for exactly 4 seconds. The chips, Cody says. Yes, all of us. Everyone in the garrison. Confirmed. We have strong reason to believe it extends across the entire Grand Army. Cody processes this without visible disturbance, which is not the same as being undisturbed. He has sat across from Obi-Wan in enough briefings to know the difference between a man who is calm and a man who is holding something larger than he is showing, and Obi-Wan is holding something considerably larger than he is showing. A silence. You returned my lightsaber, Obi-Wan says. Quietly, not an accusation, something else. Something he has thought about for the 3 days since the Invisible Hand, whatever that order would have done. You returned it to me first. Cody looks at him. Neither of them speaks for a moment. The thing being acknowledged doesn't require language, and both of them know it. The gesture that lives in the gap between a man and what was going to be done to him. The 4 seconds of genuine human action before the chip would have overridden everything. Cody has no memory of the future Obi-Wan is describing. He doesn't need one. The vigilance is in orbit, Cody says finally. His voice is unchanged. Flat, precise, the voice of a man returning to the work because the work is what he has. Routine post-battle screening. I can have the scheduling orders processed through the standard medical rotation by tonight. Thank you, Commander. Don't thank me, Cody says. Just make sure the other end of this is worth it. By midnight, the first troopers are aboard the medical frigates. They come up in small groups, 12, 15 at a time, pulled from the rotation under the cover story that will hold for exactly as long as it needs to hold. The medical droids work without pause, 12 minutes per procedure. Clean, efficient, leaving nothing visible on the surface. What they extract is small enough to rest on a fingertip. A biochip carrying 30 years of someone else's design, installed before these men were grown, before they had names, before they had any reason to resist. The troopers who go in come out the same men they were, same skills, same memories, same loyalty to their brothers, same bone-deep commitment to the people beside them. The only thing removed is something they never knew was there. The wrong rhythm, gone. The external clock that had been running inside their skulls without their knowledge, silenced. In 50 hours, the Coruscant garrison will be free. Units on Utapau won't be. Units across the Outer Rim won't be. Rex and Cody both know this, and neither of them pretends otherwise. The acknowledgement lives in the math. In the calculation that moving fast enough here is the only protection available for the men they cannot physically reach. Every hour saved at this end is an hour less distance between the Coruscant operation and the moment the signal can never be sent. Every hour matters. The frigates hold their orbit above the city. Below them. Coruscant continues its business without any awareness that something is being undone tonight that was installed before most of the men on those ships were ever grown, in a facility on a rainy world, by people who were told they were building soldiers. They built people. The distinction was never supposed to matter. It matters now. The sub-level 7 hangar of the Senate building is exactly where 2 days of research said it would be, which is, in its own way, a kind of evidence. The most powerful official in the Republic maintains an unregistered private hangar, accessible only through an unmarked service junction beneath the building's publicly acknowledged infrastructure. Fitted to house a shuttle registered to a shell corporation carrying the same fingerprint architecture as the dummy corporations from the financial threads. Palpatine's exit route. Built before the war, maintained in silence for 30 years. Obi-Wan identified the turbolift during his underworld investigation. He memorized the route. He has been waiting for the right moment to use it. The right moment is 2 hours before the Chancellor's scheduled evening briefing. The private antechamber is small and deliberate in its smallness, a space designed for function rather than impression, which makes it the only room in the suite that tells any kind of truth about what this building is for. The concealed door from the turbolift fits into the right-hand wall panel so precisely that finding it requires already knowing it exists. Obi-Wan finds it in 11 seconds. He goes still the moment he steps inside. The Force wrongness arrives immediately. Not dramatically, not a wave, not an impact. Subtler than that, and more disturbing for the subtlety. The specific quality of wrongness that accumulates slowly, the way a room used for something terrible eventually carries that use in its walls without anyone having to say so. He goes fully passive, the inversion technique, complete receptivity, and what comes back to him is the Sith medallions beneath the meditation alcove floor, radiating their steady cold outward like something buried that has never stopped breathing. He has encountered dark side artifacts before. He has been present when council members assessed objects brought back from deep space operations, things that required careful handling, that carried residue, the accumulated emotional signature of events and intent. This is different from all of those. This is not residue. This is current, active, a dampening field being fed continuously, maintained through daily ritual, functioning right now with the same reliability as the building's atmospheric processors. Something running, without a single day's interruption, for 30 years. He doesn't linger. He moves through to the main office. The octagonal chamber is everything the antechamber isn't, designed entirely for the psychological work of making visitors understand their position in the architecture of power. The central desk placed so Palpatine can observe every entry point, while his own face remains backlit against the Coruscant skyline. The viewport behind him vast, the city spread out like an illustration of consequence. The furnishings chosen with the taste of a man who requires his aesthetic to do labor. Obi-Wan walks the room's perimeter once, reading surfaces, angles, the placement of everything, and what that placement communicates about the person who arranged it. He comes to the desk. The sculpture presents as art, Naboo adjacent, suggesting senatorial sentiment. The kind of peace a man from Naboo keeps as a reminder of home. Obi-Wan reaches toward it with the Force rather than his hands, because the mechanism is Force-responsive rather than mechanical, which means reaching for it with the Force is reaching for the trigger. 2 lightsabers drop into his palm. He holds them. Red-bladed. Both. He can determine this from weight and crystal resonance without igniting them, the dark side energy banked within the kyber unmistakable to someone trained to read such things. He sets them on the desk in front of the empty sculpture housing. He stands looking at them. He has spent a week building a case from data, financial records, comm timestamps, Force impressions. The accumulated testimony of people who saw fragments without seeing the whole. The lightsabers are not data. They are the thing itself, physical and present on the desk of the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, and looking at them requires a moment that he allows himself. He takes out his recording device, documents everything, the saber's position, the empty housing, the layout of the room, the antechamber access point. He doesn't disturb the floor panel over the medallion cache. He doesn't need to, and opening it would leave evidence of intrusion before he is ready for that. He moves behind the viewport seating. The back-channel comm array is exactly where his underworld research placed it. Military-grade encryption, 6 relay points, the routing of a system engineered to reach its destination regardless of standard interference. He has spent the last 36 hours working with Padam and Mon Mothma on the evidence package, the financial architecture, the corporate registrations, the Naboo communications gap, the relay timestamp. The full dossier assembled across a week of work by 4 people across multiple intelligence networks. He connects the package to the array. He sets the trigger, a specific sequence that will broadcast the moment he activates it. When it transmits, it will travel through Palpatine's own secure channel, carrying Palpatine's own encryption signature, reaching every Senate terminal simultaneously. The evidence will appear to the entire Senate as originating from this office. No one will be able to claim the Jedi fabricated it. He closes the array panel, he crosses to the desk, he sits in the chair behind it, he sends the transmission. Then, he waits. The Chancellor arrives at precisely his scheduled time, which tells Obi-Wan something about a man who maintains rigid routine even at the end of a war. He comes through the main office entrance flanked by 2 Senate guards who stop at the threshold. Standard protocol, private office, private time. They close the door behind him. Palpatine sees Obi-Wan immediately. What crosses his face in that moment is a masterwork. Surprise, genuine appearing, warm, edged with concern. The expression of a man who has come home to find a trusted friend waiting in his study, unexpected and therefore worrying. The paternal register, the slight weight of someone who has cared deeply for a very long time. Obi-Wan. The warmth in his voice is extraordinary. My boy. I wasn't expecting you. Is something wrong? Anakin is fine, Obi-Wan says. He doesn't stand. He remains seated behind the desk, the inversion of the room's design power geometry, Palpatine now in the visitor's position without a visitor's chair to occupy. Both hands are visible, resting on the desk surface on either side of the 2 red lightsabers. Palpatine's eyes find them. Something happens in his face, very small and very fast, and invisible to anyone who hasn't spent a week learning to read the difference between the Chancellor's performed warmth and the thing that lives beneath it. The warmth continues. The expression doesn't collapse, the register doesn't shift, but something behind the eyes has recalculated. He approaches slowly. The concerned elder, moving toward the desk with the careful ease of a man who has nothing to hide and is simply trying to understand what he's looking at. I don't understand. Where did you, Chancellor? Obi-Wan says. Quietly, I've been in this office for 2 hours. A silence. I found the floor panel, he continues. I've documented the comm array. I've sent copies of everything. The financial architecture, the Naboo communications gap, the relay timestamp, the recordings from a week of investigation across 4 intelligence networks to 12 encrypted locations across the Republic, with instructions to transmit simultaneously to every Senate terminal if they don't receive a specific cancellation code from me within the next 24 hours. He holds Palpatine's gaze across the desk. I have also already sent the transmission, 40 minutes ago, through your own back-channel array. It carries your encryption signature. Every senator on Coruscant received the evidence package before you walked through that door. The warmth doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes. Slowly, the way something dissolves when the thing holding its shape is removed, the structural integrity failing in stages that are almost graceful until they aren't. The grandfatherly concern recedes. The paternal register recedes. What remains beneath both of them, visible for the first time without any layer of performance over it, is very old and very cold and entirely itself. The yellow rises in his eyes. The negotiator, Palpatine says softly. The voice has not changed dramatically. This is not a villain's reveal, not theater. It is the specific sound of a man who has stopped performing and started being something he has always been, the warmth simply absent now where it was before. And what it was covering always this, something that has survived 1,000 years by being patient and is permitting itself, at last, to be direct. I always considered Anakin the variable requiring management. I appear to have miscalculated the coefficient. You did, Obi-Wan says. "It won't matter," Palpatine says. His voice carries something that might be, in a different context, admiration, the cold appreciation of someone who has played this game long enough to recognize a well-executed move. The Senate is full of people who have spent 4 years becoming comfortable with the man who defines their fear. Evidence is not the same as persuasion. You know this as well as I do. "I'm not trying to persuade them," Obi-Wan says. "I'm removing the alternative to the truth. There's a difference." Palpatine looks at him across the desk. The yellow eyes, fully present now, the mask entirely gone, hold something that has been waiting a very long time to stop pretending to be something else. It is, in its way, almost a relief to both of them. "Then we are done pretending," Palpatine says. His hand moves toward his sleeve. Obi-Wan is already standing. The first thing Sidious does is establish distance. Not retreat, repositioning. He crosses the width of the octagonal chamber in the time it takes Obi-Wan to clear the desk, putting the viewport behind him and both entry points in his peripheral vision. It is the move of someone who has planned for this room as a combat space, who has catalogued its geometry the way a strategist catalogues terrain, because this man catalogues everything, has catalogued everything for 30 years, and the one thing he did not catalogue was Obi-Wan being here first. The dual blades carve the air between them. Not attacking yet. Measuring, Obi-Wan takes Surisu position. He knows what he is doing. He knows what he is not doing. He cannot defeat Darth Sidious alone. This is not a failure of confidence. It is an accurate tactical assessment of the most dangerous combatant alive. What he can do is hold. Keep Sidious contained in this room. Keep him working. Keep his attention divided between the Jedi in front of him and the evidence already transmitting across every Senate terminal on Coruscant. Every second Sidious spends in this chamber is a second he is not reaching the private turbolift in the antechamber, not crossing to the sub-level hangar, not disappearing in a shuttle registered to a shell corporation that no longer functions as cover. Sidious attacks. His speed is the first shock, even having anticipated it. 3 years of war have produced opponents faster than anything in the Temple's training archives, and Sidious is faster than all of them combined into a single moment. The first combination achieves 2 things. It tests Obi-Wan's guard and repositions Sidious in the room's geometry, and it costs Obi-Wan the ground behind the desk. He surrenders it without resistance. The desk is not worth defending. The ground is. Soresu, economy, hold, Sidious, attacks with the specific quality of a man who is accustomed to creating openings and is not finding one. Each combination differs from the last. Juyo doesn't repeat. It cycles through unpredictability as its primary weapon, and there are moments in the next 30 seconds where Obi-Wan's guard is narrower than he would prefer. He holds. What Sidious cannot do from inside an aggressive form against a perfect defense is also attack with the Force simultaneously. The concentration Juyo demands is total. This is Soresu's deepest strategic purpose against dark side opponents. Make them pay the full cost of every second they spend not winning. The door opens. Anakin doesn't enter dramatically. He moves through the doorway with the particular quality of motion 3 years of war have given him. Purposeful, direct, threat assessment complete before his second foot crosses the threshold. He takes in the room in a single sweep. Obi-Wan, Sidious, the 2 red blades, the position of both. He ignites his lightsaber. The dynamic shifts immediately, and Sidious knows it. He disengages from Obi-Wan and creates space to cover both angles, which is correct tactical behavior and which is also exactly what they wanted. A Sidious managing one opponent can maintain relentless pressure. A Sidious managing 2 directions simultaneously is a Sidious whose concentration is divided. Anakin moves to the flank. They have not rehearsed specific choreography, there was no time, and no need, because 13 years of fighting beside each other has produced something that doesn't require rehearsal. Obi-Wan holds the center, draws Sidious's primary attention. Makes himself the problem that demands continuous response. Anakin works the angle, applies pressure that cannot be fully addressed without opening the center. The hammer and the anvil. Sidious adapts. He is, without question, the most dangerous combatant either of them has ever faced. This remains true through the first minute of 3-way engagement. And that minute demonstrates it with painful clarity. He catches Anakin's first flank attack before it lands, redirects it into a counter that forces Obi-Wan defensive, and uses the transition to change the room's geometry again. He has been operating at this level for longer than either of them has been alive, but he is also running mathematics in real time. And the mathematics are no longer resolving in his favor. He pivots to the psychological offensive. It is the correct decision tactically. If the lightsaber engagement cannot be won, disrupting the coordination is the next available option. He turns his attention to Anakin without releasing the pressure on Obi-Wan. "The darkness in you is extraordinary," Sidious says. Conversational, precise, the register of someone who has had this conversation many times and knows exactly which words accomplish which work. I have spent 20 years cultivating it. Do you imagine that ends because you've been told a story about betrayal? The darkness doesn't negotiate with the truth about its origins. It is yours. It was always yours. He deflects Anakin's next strike without looking at it. "You could end this in 3 moves," he says. "You know you could. You can feel the exact shape of what it would require. I designed the path. It remains available regardless of what you've been told about my intentions. Your anger at what I did doesn't close it. It widens it." Obi-Wan presses from the center. Sidious parries without breaking the sentence. "You were built for this," he says to Anakin. "Not for the Order that measured you and found you frightening. Not for the Council that never fully trusted what it was looking at. For this. For precisely what you feel in this room, right now, which is the clearest thing you have ever felt in your life." He is not wrong about the clarity. This is the most disturbing part. There is no lie in what he's describing, only a misdirection so precise it uses accurate material as its instrument. Anakin can feel everything Sidious is naming. The darkness at full volume, louder than it has ever been, the accumulated weight of 20 years of manufactured grief and harvested rage that has nowhere left to go. It is the clearest thing he has felt. The darkness doesn't care about the truth of what was done to him. The darkness simply exists, enormous and available, and fitted to this moment as if this moment were the purpose it was built toward. He looks at Sidious across 3 meters of destroyed office. "You're right," he says. Sidious reads this as the opening he has been engineering. His attention sharpens by a degree that is visible. "It is the clearest thing I've ever felt," Anakin says. "You spent 20 years building it, feeding it. You kept it pointed in the wrong direction. At the Council, at the Order, at everything except you." He takes 1 step forward. His voice doesn't rise. That ends now. He stops trying to use the darkness carefully. What changes is not the darkness itself, but the direction. 20 years of cultivated rage finding its actual source for the first time, no longer misdirected, no longer managed below its full measure by training and doctrine that taught him the darkness was the problem rather than the problem's instrument. The darkness is not the problem. The man who designed it and kept it pointed at the wrong things for 2 decades is the problem. The darkness agrees. Anakin's pressure doubles. Not because his technique has changed. Gems so applied at full commitment is already the most powerful lightsaber form in practice, and he has been practicing it for 13 years. But the force behind it is no longer divided against itself. He is not fighting his own darkness while fighting Sidious. He is using his darkness to fight Sidious, and that distinction has a physical expression in the force that registers immediately. Sidious gives ground for the first time. He responds with lightning, full output, both hands, the kind that kills rather than incapacitates, the room's ambient light bleaching out in its presence. It achieves its goal, both of them forced back, engagement broken, 3 seconds purchased. It also costs 3 seconds of lightsaber engagement to a man who is now being pushed. 3 seconds is what Obi-Wan has been waiting for. He doesn't press the attack. He repositions, moves to the antechamber corridor entrance, the one ground configuration in the room that covers both exit points simultaneously and forces Sidious to address him directly or cede the room entirely. Sidious addresses him directly. The next exchange is the most technically demanding in Obi-Wan's experience. Ceresu under sustained pressure from the most refined dark side combatant in a millennium, every guard position tested, every inch of space earned and immediately contested. He doesn't attempt to win. His purpose is singular: hold him there. Keep him in the room. make holding the room cost more than Sidious can absorb while Anakin is working the opposite angle. Anakin hits from behind. Not the killing blow, Sidious moves, and what the strike catches is the primary blade hand, the grip destroyed, one saber released. Sidious disengages from Obi-Wan with a force push that sends both of them into opposite walls with enough force to take 2 seconds from each of them. He reaches for the fallen blade. Obi-Wan, still against the wall with his vision clearing, uses the force. Not combat technique, simple telekinesis, the only thing available in the half-second before Sidious's fingers close. The blade skids across the floor and stops against the viewport frame. Out of reach. Sidious stands in the center of the room. One blade remaining. 2 Jedi. The evidence already transmitted. The garrison's chips already removed. The ground chosen 2 hours ago and held. The mathematics have completed. He knows they have. He is too precise a strategist not to know immediately when a position is lost. Something moves across his face. Not fear exactly, because he replaced fear with calculation long enough ago that the distinction has become semantic. The calculation says the calculation has failed. What happens in the moments that follow is not clean. It is not triumphant. It is necessary, and they are the ones who make it so, and when it is over the result is final in the specific way of things that were always going to be true if the right people were in the right room at the right time with enough of the truth between them. He falls. The silence afterward has a specific quality, not the held silence before, which was maximum load sustained, but the silence of a load discharged. The room is destroyed in the way of a space that has just contained something it wasn't designed for. The desk demolished. The viewport cracked through. 3 wall surfaces bearing the record of what the Force looks like when it stops being careful. Obi-Wan leans against the antechamber door frame. Anakin stands in the center of the room, breathing hard, blade still lit, looking at the floor. Neither speaks immediately. The darkness is still present, available, unchanged by what just happened. This is the part no one describes accurately. Redirecting it correctly doesn't discharge it. It remains exactly what it was. What changes is only whether it has been used honestly, which is different from being free of it, and Anakin knows the difference now in a way he couldn't have named an hour ago. He deactivates his lightsaber. "It's done," he says. "The Senate has the evidence," Obi-Wan says. "The rest is politics." Anakin looks at him. "You say that like it's the easier part. I say it like it's the part where I don't have to hold Ceresu for 60 unbroken seconds against a Sith Lord," Obi-Wan says, which is the closest he is going to come, right now, to describing what the last 10 minutes actually cost. Anakin makes a sound that is approximately a laugh. Outside the corridor, Senate guards are converging. They can hear the organized response building. The building waking up around what the security systems must have flagged as a catastrophic structural event. The galaxy is catching up to what happened in this room. They have perhaps 90 seconds before it arrives. "Ready?" Obi-Wan says. Anakin looks at the room one final time. "Yes," he says. The Senate guards number 6 and they arrive professionally, weapons drawn, formation maintained. Moving with the trained competence of people who have spent 3 years performing security duties in the most politically sensitive building in the Republic and have learned to keep their faces controlled regardless of what they find. What they find stops them in the doorway. Obi-Wan doesn't make any sudden movements. He is leaning against the antechamber door frame with his arms visible and his lightsaber deactivated and clipped to his belt, in the deliberate posture of a man who anticipated this arrival and prepared for it. He looks, the guards will later report, like someone who has just finished something very large and is permitting himself, for the first time in several days, to breathe at a normal rate. "My name is Obi-Wan Kenobi," he says. "I'm a Jedi Master. I need you to contact Senate intelligence immediately and then stand down. Everything in this room is evidence in a criminal investigation, and nothing in it should be touched." The guard captain stares at the destroyed furnishings, at what is on the floor, at the cracked viewport, at the sculpture on the overturned desk with its compartment open and empty, at Anakin standing in the center of it all, tall and still, giving nothing away. "Who?" the captain says, and then stops. because the sentence has too many possible completions, and he cannot determine which one applies. The Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, Obi-Wan says, was Darth Sidious, Dark Lord of the Sith. The Senate received the evidence 47 minutes ago through his own comm array. I recommend, he adds, with the tone of a man offering professional courtesy to people who are about to have an extremely difficult night, contacting your chain of command before anyone in this building makes a statement to the press. He says this as practical advice. Because it is. The Senate chamber is not technically in session at this hour. Within 40 minutes of the transmission arriving at every terminal in the building, all 1,024 Senate pods are occupied. Senators who were sleeping are awake. Senators who were in committee are not in committee anymore. The building's comm system is running at maximum capacity, every encrypted channel in simultaneous use. The specific noise of an institution that has just received information it cannot process through any available standard channel. Mon Mothma has the floor. She obtained it within 12 minutes of the transmission arriving, an emergency session request filed and approved before most senators had finished reading the first page of the dossier. She has been preparing for this moment for 18 months of anomalous voting pattern cataloging, and she does not waste it. She presents the financial records first, not the most dramatic element, but the most legally legible and the hardest to dispute, the architecture that everything else depends on. Senate-registered corporations. Incorporating dates. Director names appearing on donor lists for specific pro-chancellor legislation. She presents this without emotional register, because emotional register is what the opposing narrative would use to claim hysteria, and she has thought carefully about what the opposing narrative will reach for. The records do their own work. Bail Organa provides the Naboo communications corroboration from his pod, in the specific voice of a man who has been holding a document for a decade and is finally, at considerable cost to everyone involved, permitted to present it. The 48-hour gap in the diplomatic channels before gun-raised ships entered Naboo's orbit. The suppressed warning signals. The clean impossibility of it being anything other than what it is. The chamber doesn't erupt. It does something more disturbing. It goes quiet in the way of a room where many people are understanding something simultaneously and have not yet found language for it. Padam watches from the observer's gallery. She doesn't speak. Her part in tonight's machinery was completed 47 minutes ago, and now she is simply one of several thousand people watching 30 years of architecture collapse in real time. She watches with the face of a politician, controlled, reading the room, already thinking about what comes after, and underneath it, a woman who is allowing herself, quietly, the specific relief of something long feared that has finally arrived and is survivable. In the Jedi Temple, Yoda opens his eyes. He has been in meditation since before the transmission arrived. He doesn't know about the transmission yet. Nobody has reached him yet. The comm system is saturated, and the temple's night staff is working through an information volume it was never designed to manage. What woke him from the meditation was not external. The fog has lifted. He has spent 30 years attributing the clouded quality of his force perception to the war, to accumulated suffering at galactic scale, to the dark side saturating civilization at the level of infrastructure. He adapted. He made decisions from diminished clarity and called it wisdom. He has been doing so for so long that he forgot what full perception felt like. He remembers now. The Force is clear in a way it has not been in his living memory's precise recollection, and what he perceives in that clarity is both revelatory and devastating, the shape of everything hidden, the architecture of the suppression, the specific location from which it radiated for 30 years. The Senate building. A man in an office, performing the role of a man he was never. Yoda sits with this for 45 seconds. Then, he takes his gimmer stick and moves toward the communication center, because there are several things to address in a specific order, and the first of them is locating Obi-Wan Kenobi and confirming he is alive. Mace Windu is already in the communication center when he arrives, standing very still, reading the transmission on a terminal screen, in the particular posture of a man whose Shatterpoint ability has just confirmed what it has been circling for weeks, and who is not yet ready to state what that feels like aloud. He looks at Yoda. He used Palpatine's own encryption, Mace says. Sent it through the Chancellor's private comm array. The evidence carries the Chancellor's own authentication signature. Yoda considers this with the specific expression he reserves for ideas that are simultaneously reckless and correct. Obi-Wan's idea, he says. It is not a question. Has to be. Yoda says. Which is not confirmation, not denial, and contains within its single syllable the full complexity of a 900-year-old Jedi Master recognizing the unmistakable signature of a Qui-Gon Jinn trained mind operating without restriction, and feeling something in the vicinity of pride that he will not be naming out loud. He's going to have to answer for a significant number of things, Mace says. Yes, Yoda agrees. Later, on 2 medical frigates in Coruscant orbit, the operation continues without pause. 6 medical droids, 12 minutes per procedure. Rex checks the count at row 400 hours, 847 chips removed from the 501st, and 212th garrisons combined. 653 remaining. The cover story has held because it no longer needs to hold much longer. The Senate transmission has rewritten the context entirely. And within hours the procedure won't require concealment. It will simply be the thing that was done, and the record of it will be clean. He thinks about fives. He does this periodically, which is not the same as dwelling. It is the specific habit of a soldier who has learned that the men you lose continue with you in the form of certain sustained attentions. Certain things you keep noticing in their name. Fives found the chips. Fives died for finding them. The official report said breakdown, and Rex carried the doubt about that report for 7 months, like a weight he couldn't set down, because setting it down would mean accepting the official report. The weight is different now. Not gone. Grief doesn't resolve into nothing. But it has a shape it didn't have before, a context that makes it legible rather than just heavy. In the 212th sector of the frigate, Cody reviews the next shift's scheduling manifest. His face tells you nothing about what is happening behind it, as it never does. He requested one item from the medical droid's log earlier in the evening, a copy of the procedure record for his own chip. Performed 4 hours ago. He has read it 3 times. He will not be reading it a 4th time. He knows what it says. He has decided what he thinks about what it says, and the decision has been filed and integrated, because that is how Cody operates. He turns back to the scheduling manifest. The Separatist command network loses coherence before dawn. Not immediately. Military infrastructure has inertia, and the droid army operates on standing orders that don't require active strategic input for continued execution. But the intelligence layer, the guiding architecture that has been shaping the war's strategic direction for 3 years, goes silent. On Mustafar, the holographic transmission terminal shows no incoming signal at the hour Lord Sidious is scheduled to transmit. The Separatist leadership waits. Newt Gunray contacts the backup channel. The backup channel returns nothing. Sandhill runs a diagnostic on the encryption array. The array is functioning correctly. There is simply nothing coming through it, because the person on the other end is no longer present to send anything. They sit with this for 2 hours before the Senate transmission reaches their monitoring systems. Then they sit with that. The war will not end in 12 hours. Wars don't end in 12 hours. The machinery of 3 years of conflict has its own momentum, and there are months of careful deceleration ahead. But the intelligence architecture that has been keeping the Separatist cause more strategically coherent than its actual capabilities justify, goes silent and stays silent, and the shape of what follows is already visible in the data before sunrise, a coalition of frightened systems making increasingly bad decisions without anyone coordinating them toward a coherent catastrophe. This was always how it would end, given the right variable changing. The Separatists were never the war. They were the mechanism. Without the mechanism's architect, they are what they always actually were underneath the design. A legitimate grievance about a corrupt republic, amplified and weaponized by someone who needed them to be more dangerous than they were. The first light of Coruscant's simulated dawn finds Obi-Wan and Anakin in a Senate intelligence holding suite. Not a cell, technically, a room with a locked door and 2 Senate investigators who have spent 3 hours trying to find the correct framework for what they are looking at. They will later report that both Jedi were cooperative and precise. They will also note, in the debrief that follows the debrief, Something harder to document, the specific quality of being in a room with two people who are completely undisturbed by their own situation in a way that is itself slightly disturbing. Obi-Wan answered every question asked, no questions unasked. Anakin sat quietly and watched, which was in some ways more disconcerting than active resistance. At the third hour, the lead investigator set down her datapad. Master Kenobi, you entered the Chancellor's private office via a sub-level turbolift that does not appear on any official building schematic. Yes, at 0100 hours. Approximately. Without a warrant, a council authorization, or any documented chain of command approval. Obi-Wan considered this with evident seriousness. Yes, he said. The investigator looked at her colleague. Her colleague appeared to be studying the wall. Outside their window, the Senate chamber was still in emergency session, debating whether evidence transmitted through a dead Chancellor's own encrypted array constituted admissible documentation under Republic law. The debate was going to continue for some time. Is there anything you'd like to add to your statement? The investigator said. Obi-Wan thought about it. I'd like a cup of tea, he said, if that's available. In the temple, before the council convenes and the full accounting begins, Yoda stands at a window. He feels the Force as he hasn't felt it in 30 years, clear, deep. The specific quality of light in a room after something long blocking it has been removed. The Sith shrine beneath the temple is still present, will need to be addressed, represents weeks of careful work ahead. But its active current is quieting, its master is gone, and the discipline that fed it daily is no longer being applied, and what remains is residue rather than intention. Residue can be cleansed. The temple has done harder things. He thinks about the clarity, and what it shows him, 3 decades of choices made in diminished light. Decisions that seemed wise and may not have been. An order that grew more rigid precisely as its perception grew less reliable, compounding one error with another across a generation. The attachment doctrine. The general's ranks. The political entanglement that was always justified as pragmatic necessity and perhaps was always something else. The Force, at full clarity, has things to say about all of it. He listens. This is what 900 years teaches, if you are paying attention, the capacity to hear the things that are hardest to hear, because the alternative is carrying them without knowing their shape. The simulated dawn lights the temple's 5 spires. The council chamber convenes at dawn. All 12 seats occupied, which hasn't happened since before the war began. The realities of a galactic conflict spread masters across too many systems, too many fronts, for full attendance to be a regular possibility. This morning, every member has returned to Coruscant, drawn by the overnight events in a way that superseded standing deployment orders. Obi-Wan and Anakin stand in the chamber center. Neither of them is in optimal condition for a council appearance. There are burn marks on Obi-Wan's robes that serve no decorative purpose, and Anakin is carrying his left arm at an angle that suggests something in the shoulder was addressed hastily by a medical droid and will require proper attention later. Mace Windu listens to the full report with the expression of a man performing extremely precise internal accounting. When it concludes, he is silent for a moment. You entered a secure government facility via an unregistered access point, he says, without council authorization, without a warrant, without notifying the chain of command at any level. You removed and retained evidence without legal documentation. You transmitted classified intelligence through a sitting head of state's private communications array. You engaged a political official in armed combat without exhausting judicial remedies. He pauses. You violated protocol on approximately 11 separate counts. Obi-Wan considers this. 12, actually, he says. I miscounted initially. The chamber is very quiet. Yoda, after a moment that contains within it the full weight of 900 years of measured response, saved us, he has. Discuss the other matters later. We will. A pause. Perhaps much later. Much later turns out to be several months. The Republic does not have a clean procedure for what comes next. Because the Republic does not have a procedure for discovering that its head of state was the architect of the war it has been fighting, the author of the emergency powers it granted him, and the owner of 2 red lightsabers retrieved from inside a decorative sculpture on his desk. The institutions grind. They were designed to grind. The specific inefficiency of democratic process is the point of it, and Padme and Mon Mothma and Bail Organa are the people who understand this most clearly, and are therefore the people who do most of the work. The Senate reconstitutes its Executive Oversight Committee within the first week. The emergency powers dissolve, not cleanly, not all at once, but in the careful way of legal architecture being disassembled by people who understand which stones are structural and which can simply be pulled. Padme chairs the Oversight Committee. She does this with complete preparation and the particular patience of someone who has been waiting to do exactly this work for a very long time and is not going to waste the opportunity by hurrying it. The separatist crisis takes longer. Wars do. But without the intelligence architecture sustaining the Confederacy's strategic coherence, the constituent systems begin, gradually, to negotiate. Some return to the Republic, some choose independent governance. Several are a genuine mess that will require a generation to stabilize. Obi-Wan sends diplomatic teams rather than clone garrisons, which is a different approach than the Council has been taking, and which turns out, in several cases, to work better. He makes 3 decrees as acting Grand Master in the months that follow. The first, Padawans may form attachments, provided those attachments are acknowledged and discussed openly rather than maintained in secret. The Force is built on connection. Denying connection doesn't protect it. It removes the honest reckoning that would have protected everyone. The second, the Jedi Council serves the Force, not the Senate. These have never been the same institution. Conflating them almost ended both, which is the specific kind of lesson that must be stated plainly and then restated at regular intervals until it no longer requires stating. The third, no Jedi serves as a general. They are peacekeepers. There is a crucial distinction. The Republic will be reminded of it consistently until the distinction is no longer considered a Jedi eccentricity, but a structural feature of how the galaxy works. Rex and Cody build the parallel communication network over 6 weeks. Not through official channels. The official channels are being reconstituted and cannot move at the speed the situation requires. Through the informal networks that clone commanders have maintained since the first months of the war, the sibling frequencies, the unit-to-unit channels, the infrastructure of loyalty that GAR governance never designed and never fully understood was happening. The information travels this way. There is a chip. It was installed during development. It carried an order. The order will not arrive. But the chip is still there, and it can be removed, and you have the right to know it exists. The Kaminoans cooperate. They are practical beings in the specific way of people who have assessed their options and made a calculation. In exchange for amnesty and a genuine seat at future negotiation tables, they provide the procedure documentation, the equipment specifications, and the facility locations where every GAR unit within reach can access surgical removal. Freedom is a process, not a moment. Rex understands this better than most. He watched Fives die for the process before the process was ready, and he has no intention of mistaking the opening of a door for the completion of a journey. But the door is open, and it will not close again. Anakin resigns his commission as a Jedi Knight on an otherwise unremarkable standard day, which he will later describe as a deliberate choice, because unremarkable days felt like the correct setting for bureaucratic transformation, and Obi-Wan disagrees about this, and the disagreement is ongoing. He does not resign from the Force. That is not a thing that can be done. He remains what the prophecy named him, the Chosen One, and he becomes something the Order has no existing classification for, a free agent of the living Force, owing allegiance to no institution, appearing where he is needed, answering to nothing except what the Force asks and what his conscience confirms. He and Padme live openly. The galaxy adjusts. The galaxy, it turns out, is currently processing sufficient quantities of more significant information to have much energy remaining for the private arrangements of a former Jedi Knight and a senator from Naboo. The twins arrive in the months that follow. He is there. Not heroically, not dramatically, simply present, in the room, holding someone's hand, doing the one thing he has spent his entire life finding the most difficult, and which turns out to be available to him after all, being there when it matters, without anything else required. Luke, Leia, he counts their fingers. both hands, both children, in the specific order of a man making very sure. The observation deck of the Jedi Temple catches the sunset from the west, which means the light goes orange and red across the Coruscant skyline before the city's own illumination takes over. Padawans used to come here to look at the stars. Anakin and Padme used to share this view sometimes, when they thought no one was watching. Obi-Wan arrives first. Anakin joins him. Neither of them is in robes, just themselves, at the end of something large, at the beginning of something they don't yet have complete language for. Below them, the city's lights are appearing one at a time, the way thoughts arrive when you finally have the space to allow them. "Do you think we got it right?" Anakin says. Obi-Wan considers this with the full seriousness it deserves. He doesn't offer comfort as a substitute for an honest answer. "We got more of it right than I expected," he says, given what we were working with. The rest, the reform, the Senate, the clones, the Outer Rim, that's going to take years, maybe a generation. The twins, among others. A beat. Anakin is quiet, which is unusual enough to mean something. "I'm going to be terrible at this," he says finally. "At being a father." "Almost certainly," Obi-Wan says. "Thanks. I'll help." The sunset deepens. The city lights multiply below them. Neither of them is in any hurry to leave, which is itself something. Two people who have been moving very fast for a very long time, permitted, finally, to stop. "You know what I never told you," Obi-Wan says. His voice has shifted slightly, not softer, but more interior, as though he is speaking from somewhere he doesn't usually allow visitors access to. "I was terrified on Naboo, when Qui-Gon died and I was facing Maul alone. I was 25 years old and I had no idea what I was doing. I won on instinct, and I spent the following year absolutely certain it had been luck." Anakin looks at him. "What changed?" "You did," Obi-Wan says. "Watching you become what you are, I stopped doubting whether the Force knew what it was doing. Something that produces you cannot be wrong." Anakin doesn't say anything. There is nothing to add that would improve it, and he knows this, and so he stands with it instead, the specific weight of being seen completely, by someone who has been present for all of it, and told that it was worth something, that it counted, that the Force, which chose him before he had any say in the matter, chose correctly. They stand on the observation deck as Coruscant's night begins around them. The city of a million lights, the center of a civilization that almost broke and didn't. Two men who are both, in their different ways, exactly where they are supposed to be. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.